Situation in Syria. We can now talk to Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First online magazine, joining us there in London. Well, the UN Human Rights Council is accusing Syrian government forces of crimes against humanity in their actions against protesters. But these findings are based on just over 200 testimonies from witnesses, with Russia calling the report biased. Is Moscow right to question these conclusions?
Well, I think that Russia's been behaving in a very responsible manner in relation to the ongoing violence in Syria, and also in accordance with international law. And I think that Moscow is right to question the conclusions in this report. This report needs to be approached in the same way that a court of law would approach it, with impartiality. Each statement needs to be analysed, and also, in particular, the sources need to be scrutinised. And if we do that with this report, we'll see that the testimonies are based on members of the Syrian opposition, people who have a vested interest in seeing the downfall of President Assad. So I don't believe any significance should be attached to these findings. And of course, it's not the first time we've seen such reports. We saw such reports regarding Kosovo, we saw them regarding Iraq, we saw them regarding Libya. And they've all been proved to be completely incorrect. So I think Moscow is correct to question the findings in this report.
But nevertheless, the majority members of the Human Rights Council are clearly very concerned. And the chief has called for urgent action to protect civilians there in Syria. So what further steps could we expect from the UN now?
Well, theoretically, there's a whole host of steps that the UN could put forward for discussion. For example, there could be talk about a no-fly zone over Syria, as what we saw with Libya. And also today, the report has recommended that President Assad be referred to the International Criminal Court. But I think, realistically speaking, the difference between Syria and Libya is the Russian factor. Russia has made it very clear that what happened in Libya will not happen in Syria, and they've already vetoed a resolution at the Security Council. So of course, there's going to be a lot more talk by the UN of what can be done, but I think the Russian factor will prove to be a critical one.
But the UN Human Rights Council is saying that we're basically witnessing a civil war in Syria with more than 4,000 already killed. So is not a wider conflict now inevitable?
Certainly the situation in Syria is very, very worrying. There's a terrible loss of life. But I don't think it's inevitable that there's going to be an escalation of the conflict. What needs to happen is that the international community needs to act as a mediator between the Syrian government and the opposition parties. That's what really needs to happen. And unfortunately, it's not helping how the American, British and French governments are demonising President Assad and are taking the side of the Syrian opposition. It's not helping the situation one bit whatsoever. And of course, given their actions, there is always a potential for further escalation of the conflict. But I don't necessarily believe that it's inevitable. There has to be mediation between the two parties.
You mentioned Libya a little earlier. The situation seems slightly different when we look at the international reaction so far. There's an unusual unity, isn't there, among Arab nations, Europe and the US, all backing pressure on President Assad. I mean, this is pretty significant, isn't it, this kind of international unity, which we didn't actually see over Libya?
I'd probably disagree with you. I think we did see this unity over Libya. I mean, we saw how the Arab League came on board with what the American government was saying and what the Europeans were saying. I think in explaining the Arab League's position, Arab countries have been watching with horror at what's been happening with the so-called Arab Spring. And I think they want to be seen as being on board with NATO, the most powerful military alliance in the world. And also I think they want to appease certain sections of their public, for example, Islamists, who played a major role in Libya, and also some of the most powerful groups that President Assad is facing at the moment. So I think the fact that the Arab League is taking such a hardline position with Syria, I think it's due to a host of factors, but in particular trying to appease their own sections of their own public.
Marcus Papadopoulos, the editor of Politics First online magazine there in London. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.